Good day, and thank you for taking the time today so that I can have a conversation with you about how you and your customers are moving into the next normal. And when we speak about the next normal, we're usually referencing COVID-19 and how to, change as the situation changes, how we come out of it. But I think the question is much bigger. It's one of actual modernization of the industry. Modernization of how you do business, modernization of how you engage customers, and modernization of how you operate your factories. Certainly accelerated by challenges we've had today, but happening nonetheless. And I think at the core of that modernization will be artificial intelligence and edge technologies, both on the factory floor, but also things that are going to be needed by your customers. IDC this year made some predictions about digital transformation that I think are directly relevant to what's happening in your industries. And I'll group them into a few parts. The area of disruption and change that's coming. So essentially what we're seeing is that the kinds of constraints in business, the need for resiliency in a workforce, volatility in the markets, volatility in the environment, are forcing us to be much more innovative in how we think about service delivery, product manufacture, product delivery. And so this idea of the age of innovation tied to accelerated disruption are tightly linked in making that future or addressing the problems of the future. The second large group is around making intelligence available everywhere and to make sure that products and services are connected. This is really a platform mindset for industry, moving to that. And that platform where people are connected or customers and products are connected and extensible across your entire set is tied to making sure that artificial intelligence is both available and can be deployed in any environment. And we'll talk about the significance of that later on. And linked to all of that is really how does the workplace change when you have these new environments, these new constraints? How are we doing that? And it's more than just, my workers can come to the office on time. Actually, we've shifted over the past few years from economies of scale to economies of skill and are entering this age of what we call the economies of intelligence, where really humans and machines are working together and making available a lot more capabilities than there were before. Those predictions or transformations that are happening in the market are actually driving what we think are four key trends. Number one, redefining our business processes to create a more resilient workforce to manage those disruptions. Number two, leveraging remote technologies and AI to really enable us to be much more productive. Modern trends in artificial intelligence and technology, I think, are best used not to replace people, but to really augment people's capabilities, make the floor worker more intelligent, make your service agent a lot more effective. Those technologies are what's going to make you a market winner or a market follower potentially. Then we're also seeing transformations in service delivery and what the word service actually means. Can we deliver product as a service and not just a single product? And by that I mean using software, software delivered updates, support, so really redefining what you need to do for services in the market. And lastly, we can't forget your business fundamentals, which is making sure that we are taking cost out of the business to be efficient and driving revenue. Increasingly, with the number of players in the market, and we'll talk later about kind of the barriers to entry, as those come down, we're seeing a higher focus on the ability of performance and quality. Let's talk about the workplace first. So there are three distinct groups in any sort of workplace. There's the line workers, supervisors, and the actual employers or senior management of the company. The workers or line staff really need to feel that there is safety in coming back to work because they need to be motivated, they need to be driven when they're back at work, and they need to be focused. But more importantly, and we've seen this every time I've talked to clients about new technologies and embedding those technologies in existing business processes, workers want to know that they have a role in the next normal. And if you implement AI projects properly, if you implement projects correctly, actually workers become very invested in that future. And that's an important part of this growth and transformation. The role of the supervisor changes as well. The supervisor, she goes from being someone who's making sure the work gets done on time, right quality, to actually monitoring and making informed decisions on the spot about risks and how to mitigate them. So the job's expanded. And since her job is expanding, she also needs to have information and wisdom at her fingertips so that she can make wiser decisions. And as an employer, the job hasn't changed so much, except the breadth of what you need to look at is much bigger. You can't focus on a few business metrics anymore. You have to bring lots of data sources together, make decisions, or at least be able to visualize what the options are and make choices. And so all these three differences in the roles are really going to be driven by technology, or enabled by technology, driven by business choice and information. So that all looks very good at the top line from what we're doing. This is how people are going to change. But let's take a look down below that and say, how will we go really make the change in the factory, for example? And that's important for you and your customers, because either you'll be making the products or selling the products used by your customers. And that'll be driven by essentially three edge technologies, right? Bluetooth-enabled mobile devices, wearables potentially, and some sort of camera or recording device. And those devices will help you monitor and manage, things such as health screenings, overcrowding, occupancy, track and monitor no-go zones within a company, provide feedback on what's happening on the floor, high risk. But that's only part of it. If you are only looking at ingestion and saying, I'm going to have static rules on what can happen in each zone of my factory floor and I'll monitor that, that'll have value. But I think the bigger opportunity comes is when you take those edge technologies and you combine them with artificial intelligence such that those systems can actually make predictions or give you dynamic changes that optimize the use of the factory floor. So for example, if at different shift times, you might have different go, no-go zones. You might allow different numbers of people into different parts of the business because there might be lower risks. So you want to be able to know that. So a worker insights platform doesn't just give you a visualization or information. It actually gives you insights and recommendations of what you can do. And when I talk about AI and talk about these technologies, people often see, I've got a bunch of devices on one side and a big brain on the other that does all the workload. And we'll talk about how workload gets distributed later on. But I think importantly that there's, within the architecture for these kinds of solutions, we really look at breaking up that workload or effort or brain power into different segments or different zones. So certainly there's the edge services which bring in the data, but there could be work done within the factory itself or at the machines of the people doing some of the monitoring so they can make some immediate choices, right? They can look at that, get some information, make a choice. Work also needs to be done directly on the device themselves. So especially in environments where workers might not be connected all the time, in mining, in oil and gas, or when people are working remote from the office and they're not accessible to a Wi-Fi link, for example, or a network link, the phone actually becomes the mini brain that they're going to need to make decisions, or need to help with to make decisions. And then lastly, obviously, there is a core functionality which brings that together, brings the data together and do some heavier lifting for analytics, heavier lifting for monitoring across all these inputs and helping senior managers and senior supervisors make decisions and monitor the business. That technology is great and it can do a lot, but it has to be built around a customer-centric approach to choose what you want to do and why you want to do it. And in IBM, we think of three different things. Can I do things better? So where does technology help me be smarter in a particular process or sub-process? Right? So that's almost what can be enabled and digitized and managed by technology. But the second question is, are we doing things in a different way? Are we taking advantage of those technologies to do things smarter? So rather than just plain lift and shift, which is important as a first step sometimes, it's critical that we look at doing the process differently or doing something differently to take advantage of those capabilities so you both get efficiencies and potential revenue growth. And doing that frees up a lot of time. It actually frees up people to make more informed choices or do other activities. And therein lies the opportunity to actually do new things. So you can open up new lines of business, new lines of service for your clients that will increase their stickiness to you, increase the value they're getting from you for buying your products and working with you directly. And so these three things together are founded on a customer-centric approach. So defining particular problems, solving those problems for certain types of people. And this is important. What we found is that when you try to solve a large, broadly stated challenge and try to solve it for everyone at once, you end up with a very large and expensive solution that might not address all the needs. It is better in customer-centric approach to define smaller groups which will have value, who are a problem that needs solving, fix that, and keep expanding those fixes out to cover more people or larger problems or different types of problems. And that iterative approach to problem solving based on a customer-centric view means that you end up with much more relevant solutions going to market. But that service context has to fit into a broader framework. And so at one side, when we think of it, there are three groups of activities or places where we try to make these changes. One is being smarter in the office or in the factory. So these are typically very asset-based kinds of fixes, looking at equipment maintenance or applying AI to optimizing workflows, optimizing manufacturing, right? That's smarter at work. On the other side is really harnessing the information of the entire business and all your customers to make your workforce truly mobile. And by mobile, I don't mean that they can go out in the field with a tablet or some mobile device and get some information. It is really about making the knowledge and wisdom of the company available to the person who's out there selling on the front line or even doing back office work so they can have access to a much broader spectrum of information. And that mobile office and smarter at work comes together through a transformation in your services, both through ecosystem partners, but also looking at how field service agents, people who are going out and working directly on customer problems, whether mechanical or device issues, are really empowered to be out in the field and have the knowledge to do and fix problems very quickly. And that connection of all that information and all that effort will make the difference as you solve customer problems and actually learn what your customers need solving. Like, what does the mobile employee of the future, the mobile service technician of the future look like? So we have seen with customers, and we've done this with them, that there are 4 groups of activities that they need to take part in. One is seeking advice. So can I get advice from the machine directly? So in the US, in a major equipment manufacturer, the sales force can go out directly to customers, ask their tablet a question about the product, some comparative information, and get that information very quickly so that they can be very informed when they meet their customers and actually have a much more interactive experience. Then there's collaboration. So you want to collaborate with people sometimes, bring them into the agile space. Bring them in so you can have a quick meeting or make a decision. And I think more and more problems are being solved using these kind of iterative, agile approaches, and the core of that is having technology that allows you to collaborate, so you don't have to be in the office together. And then the last 2 are really important. So can those machines guide you through a problem? What should you do next? Here are things you look for. In fact, we're working with public sector clients now on building those same guidance systems to train their people. And in fact, the same as in manufacturing. And lastly, and most importantly, because this is AI, we take the outputs of this interaction, the success of those interactions, and we use that not only to help people fix what they need to do, but actually train the system. So over time, your system gets more and more intelligent because it learns more and more about the business it's in. And this is really important. AI is truly successful the more it is exposed to real world data and contextualizing that help it learn what is the best approach. Now, we have done something like this as well in our Haifa labs in Israel. They took AR as an example to see what could we do if we had augmented reality in terms of service delivery. And they looked at this sort of guidance platform, which had three large components. Self-service, so I can go and scan something in, I can get some information about it, I can manage the problem myself. On the other side is peer guidance. So that AR capability allows people to see the thing we're working on. And these are physical assets. So that when you're getting guidance, it's not all text-based or someone just explaining on the phone or pictures. It's 3D renderings of what's happening so we can see, is this the right part for this machine? Does something seem wrong? Can we do some analysis on it? And thirdly, it's really having these pictures rendered as models on which we can test solutions before we implement them or understand more about the problem. And so this is just one use case. I think it's very interesting work that's going on to take this idea of guidance and making the knowledge available in different formats that can be consumed and made relevant for different situations. But how do we bring this all together? Because it all sounds great that we have these very powerful engines and AI working to make all this happen. Then you have training data and lots of data coming in. But to put that all in one central repository somewhere and do all the workloads on a big set of machines in your data center might not be efficient and might actually limit performance to some extent and might be very costly. So in IBM, we really look at this concept of edge to core to cloud. And that is putting the right kind of equipment and workload where it's best suited. So on the edge technologies, whether we talk about the mobile devices or cameras, typically that's ingestion. But in fact, you can do some workload there. You can solve some problems right on the spot without having to worry about network bandwidth or compute power in the center or available or downtimes that might be happening. So that's edge technology. Then there's your core. So many companies I know in a lot of countries keep a lot of their knowledge on-premises data centers that are tightly managed and secure. And so that has all your training data. That's where your data is for ingestion and transformation. And that's also where a lot of your repositories are. And that's fine. That makes a lot of sense for a lot of companies. And that's where the bulk of the work will happen, because we want AI technologies and essentially data management technologies to work most closely to where that information resides. And so that'll sit on your core. But increasingly, we're seeing companies becoming comfortable with using the cloud to manage different types of work. So that could be analytics, dashboarding that could be available to broader folks. But as confidence grows in the cloud environment, the cloud, IBM Cloud is a very secure environment. We see more clients moving some of these core workloads onto the cloud itself, because they can be more dynamic in how they manage compute resources, how they store and govern data. That might be easier to do on the cloud, especially if you need to provision resources dynamically to address particular problems. And what I've talked about is brought alive or is made sustainable by a culture of continuous innovation and continuous delivery. Right? It's not enough that we build a great system on day one. That system has to be sustained throughout its life cycle to remain relevant and deliver value back to the business. And we've seen a lot of clients. They've had really good things they built, but within a few months, no one's using it. And because either the data gets old, it's too hard to manage, the applications need updating. And so you need to change your culture about how to manage this. And there are three things you need to look at. Number one is application-centric development. So keeping your applications up to date, and that's DevOps, and I think many people are familiar with that. The area that's really growing now is data operations and ML operations. Data operations really focuses on making sure that the data is accessible all the time. You have proper tools to help you collect data, make those connections, keep those dynamic, and in fact organize or govern data. Because different people have different levels of access, they have different needs. Those needs are sometimes sustained or ad hoc. All those governance matters are managed through a data operations group. And we have technologies that underlie and provide that organize and collect layer for data. And then there's ML operations. Companies, about 80-90% of what they make in algorithms, or they make algorithms, they do ML designs and models, never get deployed to production. About 85% of companies don't even have, except for maybe chatbots, anything in production for their AI. And that's because the AI gets stale very quickly if it cannot be fed with new data, kept up to date, or the models are not constantly updated. And that's ML operations. It is really about having a process and tooling to help you reanalyze what your models are telling you, update them, and then keep them relevant as you infuse them across your enterprise. And that's also looking things for bias in your data, errors in your shift in your models. All those things need to be managed, and that's good ML operations. When companies do that successfully, their AI really takes off and they really get a lot more return on their investment. But this is not just talk. We have done work with a number of customers already who have got value out of looking at their worker insights and IoT platforms to actually do things in their business, as we talked about when we started. So Asia Pacific Air Hub is using it to look at what's happening on the ground, what's happening in their warehouses. DHL is looking at worker safety. Blue Scope Steel in Australia is really looking at compliance and regulatory matters. And that's the starting list. So in closing, I really want to thank you first for taking the time to listen to me today. But more importantly, take away from this talk a few points. Number one, that it is modernization that is a necessary part of being successful for the future. That modernization is enabled, yes, by your own business needs and the disruptions you face, but it will be enabled truly by having good AI and really edge technologies that give you an expanded view of what's happening in your business and your customers' view in their business. And there are many ways to start. You don't have to start with the largest implementation. You can start by identifying an initial business problem. In IBM, we have a saying that goes, dream big. Have a large aspiration of what you want to achieve, but start small. Figure out that first use case you need to go after, the first people you need to help that's going to drive value. And once you start doing that, scale rapidly. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Take care.